Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're kicking off a brand new story that's all about blood, steel, and strategy. The art of medieval warfare. This isn't just knights swinging swords or castles under siege. It's the gritty, calculated world of how battles were planned, fought, and won in the Middle Ages. Before we dive in, hit that like button if you're pumped for this. Subscribe if you love these historical deep dives. And drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing our global crew. All right, grab a snack, dim the lights, and let's march into the chaos of medieval battlefields. Picture the Middle Ages, a world of muddy fields, stone fortresses, and lords who'd rather die than lose face. Warfare wasn't just about who had the bigger army. It was a game of wits, logistics, and sheer willpower. Let's start with the basics. Why were they even fighting? Most wars boiled down to land, power, or honor. A king wanted more territory. A duke felt snubbed. Or two families had been feuding over a pig stealing apples since 1066. Sometimes it was religious crusades, where knights marched to the Holy Land with crosses on their shields, dreaming of glory but often finding dysentery instead. Whatever the reason, war was expensive, risky, and a total logistical nightmare. First, let's talk about the guys doing the fighting. The backbone of any medieval army was the knight. Those armored dudes on horseback you see in movies. Knights weren't just random guys with swords. They were elite, trained from childhood to ride, fight, and follow a code of chivalry. Their gear was top tier. Chainmail or plate armor, a lance, a sword, and a shield painted with their family crest. But knights were pricey. Feeding them, their horses, and their squires cost a fortune. So they were usually backed by a lord or king. A knight's job: charge the enemy, break their lines, and look cool doing it. But they weren't the whole story. Most armies were a mix of knights, foot soldiers, and archers. Foot soldiers, often peasants or hired mercenaries, got the short end of the stick. Crappy armor, basic weapons like spears or clubs, and zero glory. Archers, though, could change the game. English longbowmen, for example, were feared across Europe. Their bows could fire arrows that punched through armor from 200 yards away. At battles like Agincourt in 1415, longbowmen turned French knights into pincushions, proving that skill could trump status. But armies weren't just fighters. You had cooks, blacksmiths, and camp followers, people who kept the whole operation running while the swords clashed. Now, let's get into strategy, because medieval warfare wasn't just charge and hope. Commanders had to think like chess players. Terrain was huge. Fighting on a hill gave you an edge, while a river could trap you. Scouts roamed ahead, spying on enemy numbers and movements. Ambushes were common. Nobody wanted a fair fight if they could win dirty. Sieges were another beast entirely. Attacking a castle meant starving it out, battering walls with catapults, or sneaking in through a secret tunnel. Defenders, meanwhile, poured boiling oil, shot arrows, or just waited for the attackers to give up. Sieges could last months, testing everyone's patience and supplies. Weapons were where things got wild. Beyond swords and bows, you had maces that crushed armor, flails that swung like wrecking balls, and trebuchets, giant slingshots that hurled rocks or even dead cows to spread disease. Yeah, biological warfare was a thing. Armor evolved to keep up. Early chainmail gave way to plate armor by the 14th century, turning knights into walking tanks. But no armor was perfect. A well-placed arrow or a war hammer could still ruin your day. And let's not forget horses destriers. Massive war horses were like medieval Ferraris, bred for speed and power, but crazy expensive to maintain. Logistics were the unsung hero or villain of warfare. Moving an army meant feeding thousands of people and animals, hauling weapons, and keeping everyone from deserting. A single day's march could burn through tons of grain, and bad weather turned roads into mud pits. Supply lines were fragile. Cut them, and your enemies starved. Pillaging local villages was common, which didn't exactly win hearts and minds. Armies often lived off the land, leaving devastation behind. If you were a peasant, war meant your crops got trampled, your house burned, and your best goat stolen by either side. Morale was another battlefield. Soldiers needed to believe in their cause. Whether it was God, gold, or loyalty to their lord, bards and priests pumped up the troops with songs or sermons, while commanders gave rousing speeches or just handed out ale. Fear was real, though facing a wall of enemy pikes or a cavalry charge wasn't for the faint-hearted. Desertion was a problem. Caught running, you'd face flogging or worse, but victory brought loot, land, or a pat on the back from your king, so the risk could pay off. That's where we'll pause for now. Next chapter, we'll dive into the castles that shaped warfare, the tactics that won battles, and the brutal reality of being on the losing side. Drop a comment. What's the coolest medieval weapon so far? Hit that like button if you're loving this, and subscribe for more. Catch you in the next one. What's good, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. We're diving back into the wild world of medieval warfare, where strategy, steel, and a bit of luck decided who lived to brag and who ended up in a ditch. Last time, we covered the basics: knights, archers, logistics, and why wars even happened. Tonight, we're zooming in on the strongholds that defined battles, the tactics that turned the tide, and what it was like when the dust settled. If you're new, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love our global crew. All right, let's get cozy and charge back into the Middle Ages. Castles were the rock stars of medieval warfare, literally. These stone giants weren't just fancy homes for lords. They were fortresses built to withstand hell. Early castles, around the 10th century, were simple wooden motte and bailey designs. A hill motte with a tower and a fenced yard bailey below. By the 12th century, stone took over, turning castles into beasts like Dover or Crac des Chevaliers. Walls were thick, often 10 feet or more, with towers for archers and gates reinforced with iron. Moats Drawbridges and murder holes, slits for pouring hot oil made breaking in a nightmare. A well-stocked castle could hold out for months, laughing at attackers starving outside. Building a castle was no joke. It took years, thousands of workers, and enough coin to bankrupt a duke. Quarrying stone, hauling timber, and feeding laborers drained treasuries. But they were worth it. Castles controlled key roads, rivers, or borders, forcing enemies to deal with them. They weren't just defensive. Either a castle was a launchpad for raids, a symbol of power, and a safe haven for locals when invaders showed up. Inside, you had armories, stables, and great halls where lords plotted their next move over roasted boar and ale. Now, let's talk tactics, because medieval battles were more than just two mobs swinging at each other. Field battles, like Hastings in 1066, needed serious planning. Commanders picked their ground carefully. Hills for defense, open fields for cavalry charges. Formations mattered. Infantry in tight ranks with shields up, archers behind, and knights waiting to smash through. Feigned retreats were a classic trick. At Manzikert in 1071, the Seljuks lured Byzantines into a trap by pretending to run, then turned and crushed them. Communication was tough. No radios, just horns, flags, or runners shouting orders. One misstep, and your army was toast. Sieges were where strategy got brutal. Attackers had three options: starve the castle out, smash the walls, or sneak in. Starvation was slow but safe block supplies. And wait for surrender. Battering rams, catapults, and trebuchets pounded defenses, while sappers dug tunnels to collapse walls. Defenders fought back with arrows, boiling pitch, or counter tunnels to trap sappers. Trickery was fair game. At Rochester in 1215, attackers burned pig fat in a tunnel to bring down a tower. If all else failed, you could bribe a guard or exploit a weak postern gate. Sieges were a test of endurance, with disease and hunger often killing more than swords. Naval warfare was rarer, but no less intense. Vikings ruled early medieval seas with their long ships fast, shallow boats perfect for raids. By the 13th century, galleys with oars and sails dominated, armed with rams or Greek fire, a napalm-like weapon that burned on water. Naval battles, like Sly's in 1340, were chaotic, with ships grappling and soldiers fighting hand-to-hand. Controlling the sea meant cutting supply lines or landing troops, making it a game-changer in wars like the 100 Years' War. Losing a battle was grim. If you were a knight, you might get captured and ransomed. Nobles were worth more alive than dead. Common soldiers weren't so lucky. Slaughter was common, especially if the enemy was mad, or you'd resisted too long. Fleeing didn't help. Cavalry could run you down. Towns that fell faced looting, burning, or worse. At Jerusalem in 1099, Crusaders massacred thousands after breaching the walls. Mercy wasn't guaranteed, and survivors often ended up enslaved or begging. Even winners paid a price. Wounds got infected, and disease like dysentery swept through camps. War was glorious in songs, but in reality, it was a meat grinder. Victory brought rewards, though Loot was split among soldiers' gold, armor, even livestock. Land grants or titles could follow, especially for loyal knights. Kings held feasts to celebrate, with bards spinning tales of heroism that glossed over the mud, and screams. But victories were fragile. A won battle didn't mean a won war, and new enemies always lurked. The Middle Ages was a world where peace was just a pause between fights. That's it for this chapter. Next time, we'll explore the human side of war knights' codes, the toll on peasants, and how warfare shaped medieval society. Drop a comment. What's the slickest siege tactic you heard? Hit that like button if you're digging this, and subscribe for more. Catch you in the next one. Hey, everyone! Welcome back to the channel for the final chapter of our medieval warfare saga. We've battled through armies, castles, and tactics, seeing how the Middle Ages turned fighting into an art form. Tonight, we're getting personal diving into the knight's code of chivalry, the brutal impact on peasants, and how war shaped the world these folks lived in. If you're new, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love our global crew. Let's get cozy and wrap up this bloody, epic journey. Knights weren't just warriors. They were the rock stars of the Middle Ages, living by a code called chivalry. It wasn't just be nice. It was a mix of honor, loyalty, and showmanship. A knight swore to protect the weak, serve their lord, and fight bravely. Sounds noble, right? But it was also practical. Lords needed loyal fighters, and the church wanted to rein in these armored hotheads. Chivalry meant dueling with respect, sparing defeated knights for ransom, and wooing ladies with poetry or jousts. Tournaments were huge, like medieval Super Bowls, where knights showed off in mock battles, earning fame and sometimes a lady's scarf as a prize. But let's be real, chivalry had limits. On the battlefield, honor could vanish. Knights slaughtered peasants, looted towns, and ignored protect the weak when it suited them. During the Crusades, chivalric ideals clashed with reality. Knights preached holy war, but often ended up pillaging. Still, the code shaped how knights saw themselves. A good knight, like William Marshall in the 12th century, could rise from nothing to legend through loyalty and skill. Chivalry was part myth, part hype, but it gave knights a script to follow in a chaotic world. For peasants, war was less glamorous. It was a disaster. Most weren't fighters. They were farmers caught in the crossfire. Armies trampled crops, stole livestock, and burned villages to deny enemies supplies. If you lived near a contested border, your life was a cycle of rebuilding and running. During sieges, peasants might hide in castles, but if food ran low, they were kicked out to fend for themselves. Conscription was another kick in the teeth. Lords could draft peasants as foot soldiers, handing them a spear and no training. Survival odds, not great. If you dodged the battlefield, you still paid war taxes, squeezing your already thin wallet. Women faced their own horrors. When towns fell, they were often targets for violence or enslavement. Noble women might be ransomed or married off to seal peace deals. But peasant women had no such leverage. Yet some women defied the odds. Joan of Arc, a peasant girl in the 15th century, led armies with divine visions, proving women could shape wars too. Others ran households or defended castles, while lords were away, showing grit in a world that rarely gave them credit. War didn't just destroy it, built medieval society. Castles dotted the landscape, creating power hubs where lords held court. Taxes for wars funded roads and markets, accidentally boosting trade. Armies needed blacksmiths, fletchers, and tailors, sparking crafts that outlasted battles. The church got a boost too. Wars like the Crusades filled its coffers with donations, and priests blessed armies to keep divine favor. Knighthood and chivalry inspired art, from tapestries to poems, giving us classics like the tales of King Arthur. Technology evolved with war. The stirrup, borrowed from Asia, made cavalry charges deadlier. Gunpowder, arriving late in the 14th century, changed everything. Cannons smashed castle walls, ending the age of impregnable fortresses. By the 15th century, professional armies with pikemen and musketeers replaced ragtag feudal levies, paving the way for modern warfare. Even politics shifted. Wars consolidated kingdoms, think England and France, during the 100 Years' War, laying roots for nation-states. The human cost, though, was staggering. Beyond the dead and wounded, war left scars on communities. Orphans, widows, and displaced families were common. Disease followed armies, spreading plague or smallpox. Rebuilding took years, and grudges lasted generations, fueling new wars. Yet people adapted. Villages fortified walls, peasants hid grain, and lords built alliances through marriage or betrayal. Survival was a skill, honed in the shadow of swords. Medieval warfare wasn't just about winning, it was about enduring. Knights chased glory, lords played power games, and peasants just tried to make it to spring. It was messy, brutal, and sometimes heroic, shaping a world where strength meant survival. The echoes of those battles' castles, songs, even our idea of honor still linger today. That's the end of our medieval warfare saga. Thanks for marching through the mud with me. Drop a comment. What's the wildest war fact you learned? Hit that like button if you loved this, and subscribe for more historical dives. Next, we're tackling a new story, so stay tuned. Catch you in the next one. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're diving into a fresh story that's all about craft, hustle, and community. The rise of medieval guilds. These weren't just clubs for blacksmiths or bakers. They were the heartbeat of towns, shaping trade, art, and even politics in the Middle Ages. Before we jump in, hit that like button if you're excited. Subscribe if you love these historical adventures, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love our global crew. All right, grab a drink, get comfy, and let's step into the bustling streets of medieval Europe. Imagine a medieval town, muddy roads, timber houses, and the clang of hammers from workshops. By the 11th century, towns were growing fast, and with them came a new kind of organization, the guild. Guilds were like unions, trade groups, and social clubs rolled into one. If you were a weaver, a butcher, or a goldsmith, your guild was your lifeline. They set standards, protected your job, and gave you a voice in a world where lords and kings usually called the shots. Guilds weren't just about work. They were about belonging in a cutthroat economy. There were two main types: merchant guilds and craft guilds. Merchant guilds were the big dogs, controlling trade in goods like wool, wine, or spices. They negotiated with lords for market rights, set prices, and made sure foreign traders didn't undercut locals. Craft guilds, though, were where the real artistry happened. Every trade bakers, tanners, carpenters had its own guild, each with rules, ranks, and a fierce pride in their work. Want to make shoes? You'd better join the Cobbler's Guild, or good luck selling anything without getting fined or run out of town. Joining a guild wasn't easy. You started as an apprentice, usually a teenager, working for a master craftsman for years, sometimes 7 or more. You lived in their house, learned the trade, and got paid in food and a cot. Mess up, expect a scolding, or worse. If you survived, you became a journeyman, working for wages and proving your skills. The ultimate goal, becoming a master, running your own shop, and training your own apprentices, but that took talent, connections, and often a hefty fee to the guild for approval. It was a grind, but it kept quality high and trades exclusive. Guilds were obsessed with standards. They inspected every loaf, sword, or barrel to ensure it met their rules. Shoddy work could get you fined, shamed, or kicked out. In London, bakers caught selling underweight bread were dragged through the streets with the bad loaf tied around their neck. Talk about public humiliation. Guilds also set prices and wages, keeping competition fair but fierce. If you tried selling outside the guild's rules, you'd face boycotts or worse. It was like a medieval niche market stick to your lane. Or you're out. But guilds weren't all work and no play. They were social hubs, throwing feasts, funding chapels, and hosting festivals. Members looked out for each other, paying for funerals or helping sick craftsmen. Guilds even had their own saints sainty. Crispin for shoemakers, Saint Eloi for smiths, and celebrated them with parades. They built almshouses for the poor and sponsored plays, like the mystery plays in York, where guilds staged Bible stories with serious flair. If you were in a guild, you weren't just a worker. You were part of a family. Guilds also had clout. In towns like Florence or Bruges, they weren't just tradesmen. They were power players. Merchant guilds loaned money to kings, while craft guilds pushed for laws to protect their trades. In some cities, guild leaders sat on town councils, rubbing elbows with nobles. During revolts, like the 1381 Peasants' Revolt in England, guilds could tip the scales, either backing the crown or stirring the pot. They weren't always noble guilds, could be cliquey, keeping out women, foreigners, or anyone who didn't fit their mold, but they gave towns a backbone. That's where we'll pause for now. Next chapter, we'll dive into the crafts themselves, the rivalries between guilds, and how they turned towns into economic powerhouses. Drop a comment. What's the coolest medieval trade so far? Hit that like button if you're loving this, and subscribe for more. Catch you in the next one. What's good? Everyone, welcome back to the channel. We're diving back into the world of medieval guilds, where craftsmen ruled towns with skill, swagger, and some serious rules. Last time, we covered what guilds were, how you joined one, and why they were the glue holding medieval economies together. Tonight, we're zooming in on the crafts themselves, the drama between guilds, and how they turned sleepy villages into bustling trade hubs. If you're new, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love our global crew. All right, let's get cozy and head back to the medieval workshop. Every guild had its niche, and they guarded it like dragons hoarding gold. Take blacksmiths. They didn't just make horseshoes. They forged swords, armor, and even delicate hinges, each piece inspected for quality. A single dent could mean a fine or a ruined rep. Weavers spun wool or linen into cloth that rivaled modern fashion, with guilds like Florence's Arte della Lana setting trends across Europe. Goldsmiths crafted jewelry so fine it made kings drool, while bakers churned out bread that was literally life or death for townsfolk. Each trade had secrets, recipes, techniques, tools passed down like sacred texts, only shared with trusted apprentices. Crafting wasn't just work, it was art. Take illuminated manuscripts, monks and scribes in scriptorium guilds, painted books with gold leaf, and pigments ground from lapis lazuli. A single page could take weeks, blending calligraphy, illustration, and prayer. Masons built cathedrals like Notre Dame, using math and muscle to stack stones that still stand today. Their guilds were so elite, they left secret marks on stones to claim their work. Even lowly trades, like tanners, turned stinky hides into leather for shoes or armor, proving every guild had pride in its hustle. Rivalries were spicy. Guilds fought over turf, resources, and prestige. In 14th century London, the fishmongers and grocers threw shade over who controlled spice imports, dragging courts into their beef. Weavers and dyers clashed over who got credit for fancy cloth dyers claimed their colors made the fabric pop, while weavers said their looms did the heavy lifting. These weren't just arguments. They could spark riots or bans. Guilds also snubbed outsiders if you weren't born in the right town or had the wrong accent. Good luck getting in. Women rarely allowed, though some, like widows running their husband's shop, snuck through the cracks. Guilds weren't just local. They networked like medieval LinkedIn. Trade routes linked guilds across Europe, with cities like Venice or Bruges as hubs. The Hanseatic League, a mega guild of merchants, controlled Baltic trade, strong-arming kings and pirates alike. Guilds swapped goods. English wool for Italian silk, German beer for Spanish leather, creating a web that made towns rich. Markets buzzed with guild stalls, each marked with banners or crests, like a medieval brand logo. Fairs, like champagnes in France, were Coachella for guilds, mixing trade, deals, and drunken brawls. Towns owed their glow-up to guilds. Before the 11th century, most of Europe was rural, with peasants tied to lords. Guilds changed that, turning towns into economic engines. They built infrastructure bridges, walls, even hospitals funded by guild dues. Guild halls, like the one in York, were swanky HQs where members flexed their wealth with tapestries and feasts. Guilds also trained the next generation, ensuring skills didn't die out. By the 13th century, cities like Paris or Ghent were guild-driven, with craftsmen outnumbering nobles and calling shots in local politics. But it wasn't all rosy. Guilds could be greedy, fixing prices to screw customers or block new tech to protect their niche. In 15th century Germany, printers faced pushback from scribes who saw the printing press as a job killer. Guilds also reinforced class divides. Masters got rich, while journeymen slaved for crumbs. Strikes happened. In 1378, Florence's wool workers, the Ciompi, revolted over low wages, shaking the city. Guilds were powerful, but their tight grip could spark trouble when folks felt squeezed. That's it for this chapter. Next time, we'll explore the legacy of guilds, their role in art and culture, and how they faded as the modern world rolled in. Drop a comment. What's the craft you'd join in a guild? Hit that like button if you're loving this, and subscribe for more. Catch you in the next one. Hey, everyone, welcome back to the channel for the final chapter of our Medieval Guilds saga. We've hammered through what guilds were, the crafts they mastered, and how they turned towns into trade powerhouses. Tonight, we're wrapping up with their lasting impact, how guilds shaped art, culture, and society, plus what happened when their grip started to slip. If you're new, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love our global crew. Let's get cozy and finish this crafty journey. Guilds weren't just about making stuff. They were culture creators. Their work defined medieval art, from cathedrals to tapestries. Take Gothic architecture. Mason guilds like those in Chartres carved stone into soaring arches and stained glass that told Bible stories to illiterate folks. These weren't just buildings. They were sermons in stone, funded by guild donations to flex their piety and wealth. Illuminators in scriptorium guilds produced books like the Book of Kells, with intricate designs that took years to finish. Even everyday items, pewter mugs, embroidered cloaks bore guild marks, turning utility into art. Guilds also bankrolled culture. They sponsored mystery plays, where townsfolk acted out Noah's Ark, or the crucifixion with guild-funded props and costumes. In Chester, the Smiths Guild built a giant hell mouth for their play Think Medieval special effects. Music got a boost too. Guilds hired minstrels for feasts or processions, spreading tunes that inspired troubadours. Guild festivals, like St. John's Day, were block parties with parades, dances, and enough ale to float a ship. These events knitted communities together, giving folks a break from the grind. Socially, guilds were game changers. They gave craftsmen a voice, letting them negotiate with lords or kings. In cities like Siena, guild leaders ran the show, passing laws and building civic pride. Guilds also created safety nets if a member died. They'd pay for the funeral or support the widow. Charity was big. Guilds funded hospitals, like St. Bartholomew's in London, or gave alms to the poor. But they weren't saints. Guilds could be elitist, barring women or minorities and hoarding power. Still, they gave the little guy a shot at respect in a world ruled by nobles. Guilds shaped the economy too. Their standards ensured trust. Buy a guild-made sword, and you knew it wouldn't snap. This trust fueled trade, linking towns into networks that spanned continents. Guilds like the Arte della Seta in Venice turned silk into gold, making Italy a fashion capital. They also trained workers, creating a skilled labor force that outlasted the Middle Ages. Apprenticeship wasn't just about craft. It taught discipline and pride, values that carried into modern professions. But by the 15th century, cracks appeared. The Black Death in 1348 shook things up, killing workers and driving up wages. Guilds tried to cap pay, sparking resentment. New tech, like the printing press, threatened traditional trades. Scribe guilds fought printers but lost. Merchant capitalists, with deeper pockets, started bypassing guilds, hiring cheap labor outside their rules. In England, the Statute of Artificers in 1563 tried to regulate guilds, but it was a bandage on a sinking ship. By the 16th century, guilds were losing clout to factories and global trade. The end wasn't sudden. Some guilds evolved, becoming trade associations or ceremonial groups. Others clung to old ways, fading as markets outgrew them. In France, the Revolution in 1789 banned guilds, calling them monopolies. Yet their legacy lived on. Modern unions owe a nod to guild solidarity and craftsmanship, like Swiss watches or Italian leather echoes their obsession with quality. Guild halls still stand, like Bruges' belfry, as reminders of their power. Even our idea of masterpiece comes from guild tests for mastery. Guilds were messy, brilliant, and human. They gave craftsmen pride, towns wealth, and the Middle Ages its shine. They weren't perfect, greedy, exclusive, sometimes stuck in the past, but they built a world where skill mattered. From cathedral spires to the bread on your table, guilds left their mark, proving that a good craft can outlast empires. That's the end of our guild saga. Thanks for crafting this journey with me. Drop a comment. What's the guild legacy you love most? Hit that like button if you enjoyed this, and subscribe for more historical dives. Next, we're tackling a new story, so stay tuned. Catch you in the next one. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're kicking off a new adventure into a world of faith, danger, and epic road trips, the world of medieval pilgrimage. This isn't just about praying at a shrine. It's about journeys that tested body and soul, shaping the Middle Ages. Before we dive in, hit that like button if you're pumped. Subscribe if you love these historical dives. And drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love our global crew. All right, grab a snack, get comfy, and let's hit the Pilgrim Trail. Picture medieval Europe, a patchwork of kingdoms, forests, and faith. Pilgrimage was huge. Christians, and sometimes Muslims or Jews, traveled to holy sites to pray, seek miracles, or atone for sins. It was like a spiritual niche, blending devotion, adventure, and a bit of tourism. Major destinations were Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago de Compostela in Spain. But local shrines, like Canterbury in England, drew crowds too. Why go? Some wanted healing, a cure for blindness or a broken leg. Others sought forgiveness for, say, stealing a neighbor's cow. For many, it was a way to feel closer to God in a world full of plague and war. Pilgrims weren't just monks or nobles. Everyone went. Peasants saved for years to walk to a local saint's tomb. Knights trekked to Jerusalem to honor vows. Even kings, like Louis IX of France, made pilgrimages to show piety. Women joined too, often in groups for safety. The church encouraged it, offering indulgences, spiritual get-out-of-jail cards that cut time in purgatory. But pilgrimage wasn't cheap or easy. You needed coin for food, lodging, and bribes, plus the grit to face bandits, storms, or dysentery. It was a leap of faith, literally and figuratively. The journey started with prep. Pilgrims got a blessing from their priest, a staff for walking, and a wide-brimmed hat to fend off sun or rain. They wore a scrip, a small bag for food or relics, and a cloak with a cross or scallop shell, the symbol of Saint James for Compostela pilgrims. Some went barefoot as penance, which was as painful as it sounds. Routes were well trodden, like the Camino de Santiago, with way stations, monasteries, or hospices offering beds and broth. Guidebooks, like the 12th century Pilgrim's Guide to Santiago, gave tips on safe paths, dodgy inns, and which rivers had fishy water. Travel was rough. Pilgrims walked 15-20 miles a day, blisters and all, through forests or mountains. Rivers meant rickety bridges or ferries run by sketchy boatmen. Bandits lurked on lonely roads, preying on pilgrims' coin or relics in the Holy Land. Crusader wars added danger. Pilgrims could get caught in sieges or robbed by Saracens. Weather was another foe. Rain turned paths to mud, and winter froze toes. Disease was everywhere. Inns were germ factories, and water sources weren't exactly Evian. Many pilgrims never made it home, dying en route or at their shrine. But the road had perks. Pilgrims swapped stories, sang hymns, or prayed together, building a vibe like a medieval Coachella. Taverns offered ale and gossip, while markets sold souvenirs, badges, vials of holy water, or fake relics like St. Peter's toenail. Relics were big. A shrine with a saint's bone or a piece of the true cross drew crowds like a rock star. Some were legit, others scams, but pilgrims didn't care. They wanted the magic. At the shrine, you'd pray, touch the relic, or crawl to the altar, hoping for a miracle. Some left offerings, coins, candles, or wax limbs symbolizing healed body parts. That's where we'll pause for now. Next chapter, we'll dive into the shrines themselves, the scams that popped up, and how pilgrims changed the towns they visited. Drop a comment. What's the wildest pilgrimage detail so far? Hit that like button if you're loving this, and subscribe for more. Catch you in the next one. What's good, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. We're back on the medieval pilgrimage trail, where faith, danger, and a bit of hustle made every step an adventure. Last time, we covered why people hit the road, who they were, and the gritty reality of trekking to holy sites. Tonight, we're zooming in on the shrines that drew millions, the scams that preyed on pilgrims, and how these journeys transformed towns into medieval hotspots. If you're new, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love our global crew. All right, let's get cozy and keep walking. Shrines were the heart of pilgrimage, like the ultimate niche for spiritual seekers. Big ones, like St. Peter's in Rome or the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, were bucket list stops, but local sites, like St. Thomas Becket's tomb in Canterbury, had serious pull. Becket, murdered in 1170, became a superstar saint. His shrine was a gold-plated box studded with jewels. Holding his relics, pilgrims flocked there, inspired by stories of miracles, like blind folks seeing or lame ones walking. Compostella's shrine to Saint James was another magnet. With a giant incense burner, the Botafumeiro, swinging over crowds to mask the smell of sweaty pilgrims. Getting to the shrine was only half the battle. Once there, you'd face chaos crowds shoving to touch the relic, priests chanting, and vendors hawking badges or holy trinkets. You might kneel for hours, praying for a miracle, or slip a coin into an offering box. Some shrines had rituals, like crawling through a tunnel or kissing a saint's bone. In Rome, pilgrims climbed the Scala Santa steps, said to be from Jesus' trial on their knees. It was intense, emotional, and sometimes a literal crawl to salvation. Miracles weren't guaranteed, but the hope kept people coming. Scams were everywhere. Relics were the biggest hustle. A church might claim to have Mary's veil or a splinter of the cross, but half the time, it was pig bone or random wood. In 1350, one Italian monk sold feathers from the Archangel Gabriel to gullible pilgrims. Talk about bold. Fake miracle workers staged healings, limping dramatically before cured by a shady priest. Inns overcharged. Guides led pilgrims into ambushes. And pickpockets worked crowds like pros. The church cracked down sometimes, but plenty of clerics were in on the grift, selling indulgences or fake blessings for extra coin. Pilgrims weren't always saints either. Some were thrill seekers, using pilgrimage as an excuse to dodge work or taxes. Others were criminals. Courts sent thieves or adulterers on pilgrimage as punishment. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales nails this. With pilgrims like the bawdy wife of Bath, or the shady pardoner swapping dirty stories on the road. Taverns along routes were party zones, with dice games, flirting, and fights. Pilgrimage was spiritual, sure, but it was also a human mess faith mixed with greed. Hope with hustle, towns along pilgrimage routes got a major glow-up. Places like Santiago or Canterbury became boom towns, with inns, markets, and churches popping up to cash in. Hospices, run by monks or guilds, offered beds and soup. Funded by pilgrim donations, roads improved, bridges got built, and trade followed. Souvenir shops sold everything from pewter badges to holy oil. In Rome, pilgrims spent so much that the city's economy leaned on them. But it wasn't all profit. Towns dealt with crime, disease, and the occasional riot when pilgrims got rowdy. Still, pilgrimage put sleepy villages on the map, turning them into medieval tourist traps. The church loved pilgrimage. It filled pews and coffers. Shrines raked in offerings, and indulgences were a cash cow. Bishops built bigger churches to handle crowds, like Chartres with its labyrinth for pilgrims to crawl. But the church also worried too many pilgrims skipped Mass for taverns, and fake relics embarrassed the faith. By the 13th century, reforms tried to clean things up. But the pilgrimage hype was unstoppable. It wasn't just about money, it was about control, keeping folks devout in a world of war and doubt. That's it for this chapter. Next time, we'll explore the legacy of pilgrimage, its impact on culture, and how it faded with the modern age. Drop a comment. What's the shadiest pilgrimage scam you heard? Hit that like button if you're loving this. And subscribe for more. Catch you in the next one. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the channel for the final chapter of our medieval pilgrimage saga. We've trekked through the roads, shrines, and scams that made these journeys a wild mix of faith and chaos. Tonight, we're wrapping up with the lasting legacy of pilgrimage, how it shaped art, culture, and society, plus what happened when the world moved on. If you're new, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love our global crew. Let's get cozy and finish this spiritual road trip. Pilgrimage wasn't just a trip. It was a cultural juggernaut. It inspired some of the Middle Ages' greatest art and stories. Cathedrals like Santiago or Canterbury were built for pilgrims, with soaring arches and relics displayed like museum pieces. Stained glass told saintly tales, guiding illiterate folks through faith. Sculptors carved portal reliefs like Compostella's Portico of Glory, showing heaven and hell to awe crowds. Pilgrims carried these images home in badges or sketches, spreading styles across Europe. Even music got a boost. Pilgrim hymns like Salve Regina echoed in taverns and churches, shaping medieval soundtracks. Literature owed pilgrimage big time. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, written in the 14th century, is a love letter to the road, with pilgrims swapping stories from bawdy to pious. Dante's Divine Comedy used pilgrimage as a metaphor, guiding readers through hell to heaven. Travelogues, like those of Marjorie Kemp, a 15th century mystic, gave us raw glimpses of pilgrim life blisters, tears, and all. These works weren't just art. They were windows into a world where faith drove people to walk 1,000 miles. Socially, pilgrimage mixed things up. It threw peasants, knights, and merchants together, blurring class lines for a bit. On the Camino, a lord might share bread with a farmer, swapping tales of miracles. Women found freedom. Widows or nuns like Egeria in the 4th century wrote travel diaries, defying norms. Pilgrimage also spread ideas. Travelers from England to Jerusalem carried news, recipes, even heresies, shaking up local traditions. But it wasn't all rosy. Pilgrims could be snobs, mocking lesser shrines, and towns fought over whose saint was holier. Rivalries, like Rome versus Compostela, got petty fast. Economically, pilgrimage was a gold mine. Towns like Jerusalem or Beckett's Canterbury lived off pilgrim coin inns. Stables and trinket shops thrived. Guilds got in on it, crafting badges or reliquaries. Trade routes grew, linking shrines to markets, and banks like the Templars handled pilgrim cash. But the flip side was rough. Overcrowded towns bred disease plague, followed pilgrims like a shadow. Crime spiked too. Bandits and conmen saw pilgrims as easy marks. Still, the cash flow built bridges, hospitals, and schools, leaving a legacy in stone. The church leaned hard on pilgrimage. It kept folks devout, filled coffers, and gave bishops clout. Indulgences were a spiritual niche, letting pilgrims buy forgiveness. Controversial, but lucrative, shrines became power hubs, with clerics guarding relics like Fort Knox. But by the 15th century, cracks showed. The Reformation slammed pilgrimage, with Protestants like Luther calling it idolatry. Fake relics and greedy priests fueled the backlash. In England, Henry VIII trashed shrines like Beckett's in the 1530s, melting gold for his treasury. Pilgrimage didn't die, but it took a hit, yet its legacy endured. The Camino de Santiago still draws thousands today, blending faith and fitness. Medieval routes shaped modern roads. Spain's highways follow pilgrim paths. Art and stories from pilgrimage inspired Renaissance painters and romantic poets. Even our idea of travel seeking meaning, not just sights, echoes those dusty trails. Pilgrimage taught Europe to move, mix, and dream, leaving footprints deeper than any shrine. Pilgrimage was messy, holy, human, and sometimes shady. It pushed people to their limits, built communities, and left a mark on history. Whether for God, glory, or a good story, pilgrims walked into legend, proving faith could move mountains, or at least get you across one. That's the end of our pilgrimage saga. Thanks for trekking with me. Drop a comment. What's the coolest pilgrim legacy? Hit that like button if you loved this. And subscribe for more historical dives. Next, we're tackling a new story. So stay tuned. Catch you in the next one. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're diving into a new story that's equal parts science, magic, and mystery. The secrets of medieval alchemy. This isn't just about turning lead into gold. It's a wild journey through a world where scholars chased immortality and wisdom in smoky labs. Before we jump in, hit that like button if you're excited. Subscribe if you love these historical dives. And drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love our global crew. All right, grab a drink, get cozy, and let's step into the shadowy world of medieval alchemists. Picture the Middle Ages, a time of faith, var, and flickering candles. Alchemy was the ultimate niche for curious minds, blending chemistry, philosophy, and a dash of mysticism. It wasn't just a science, it was a quest for the divine. Alchemists believed the universe had hidden secrets, and by mixing metals or brewing potions, they could unlock them. The big dream, the philosopher's stone, a mythical substance that turned base metals into gold, granted eternal life, and maybe made your soup taste better. Spoiler, nobody found it. But the chase changed history. Alchemy's roots go back to ancient Egypt, where metallurgists mixed ores in temple labs. By the 8th century, Islamic scholars like Jabir ibn Hayyan, the father of chemistry, wrote texts on distillation and acids, passing their wisdom to Europe via Spain. By the 12th century, alchemy hit medieval Europe hard, fueled by translations of Arabic books. Monks, scholars, and even kings got hooked, setting up labs in monasteries or castles. It was risky. Alchemy was part science, part heresy, and the church wasn't always thrilled about folks playing God. An alchemist's lab was a sight to behold. Picture a stone room lit by torches, with clay crucibles bubbling over fires. Shelves held glass vials of mercury, sulfur, and weird powders labeled in Latin. A bellows puffed air into the furnace, while parchments scribbled with symbols, circles, triangles, cryptic codes littered the table. Tools like alembics, early stills, and retorts distilled liquids, filling the air with acrid smoke. It was half workshop, half wizard's lair, and the vibe was intense. One wrong move, and you'd burn the place down or poison yourself. Alchemists weren't just random weirdos. They were often educated elites. Think Roger Bacon, a 13th century friar who mixed alchemy with optics, or Albertus Magnus, a scholar saint who wrote about metals. They saw alchemy as a spiritual path, believing that purifying metals mirrored purifying the soul. The process had stages: nigredo, blackening; albedo, whitening; rubedo, reddening, each tied to mystical ideas about death and rebirth. It wasn't just chemistry, it was a cosmic drama, with the alchemist as both scientist and priest. The big goal was transmutation, turning lead into gold. Why gold? It was perfect, incorruptible, like the divine. Alchemists thought all metals were gold, deep down, just impure. By heating, mixing, or praying over them, you could speed up nature's work. They used recipes called opus works, blending metals with acids or herbs. Most failed, but some stumbled on real chemistry, like distilling alcohol or making gunpowder. Kings loved alchemists, hoping for gold to fund wars. But fakes got executed if they couldn't deliver. Alchemy wasn't all lab work. It was a mindset, blending Greek philosophy, Christian mysticism, and Arabic science. Alchemists read Plato, who saw the world as shadows of perfect forms, and Hermes Trismegistus, a mythical sage whose emerald tablet was their Bible. Symbols were huge. Mercury was spirit. Sulfur was soul. Salt was body. Decoding these was like cracking a cosmic puzzle, and alchemists guarded their secrets with coded texts or fake recipes to throw off rivals. That's where we'll pause for now. Next chapter, we'll dive into the alchemists' wild experiments, their feuds, and how they danced with danger. Drop a comment. What's the coolest alchemy fact so far? Hit that like button if you're loving this, and subscribe for more. Catch you in the next one. What's good? Everyone, welcome back to the channel. We're diving back into the smoky, mysterious world of medieval alchemy, where scholars chased gold, immortality, and cosmic secrets. Last time, we covered what alchemy was, who was doing it, and the wild labs where it all went down. Tonight, we're getting into the experiments that lit up or blew up those labs, the rivalries that sparked drama, and the tightrope alchemists walked between genius and danger. If you're new, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love our global crew. All right, let's get cozy and stir the alchemical pot. Alchemists were the ultimate tinkerers, mixing stuff in ways that sound like medieval mad science. Their niche was experimentation, and their labs were playgrounds for the curious. A typical opus recipe might start with melting lead in a crucible, adding mercury for spirit, and sulfur for soul. They'd heat it for days, watching for colors black, white, red, hoping for the philosopher's stone, or at least some gold. Distillation was big, using alembics. They boiled liquids to separate essences, like alcohol from wine. One alchemist, Arnold of Villanova, distilled so much, he accidentally invented brandy. Cheers to that. Some experiments were straight up bizarre. To make the elixir of life, alchemists mixed urine, blood, or even toad venom, believing they held vital forces. Others chased the panacea, a cure-all potion, using herbs like mandrake or metals like antimony. Results were iffy. Some potions poisoned, others did nothing but a few worked. Alchemists discovered acids like aqua regia, which dissolved gold, and stumbled on early medicines, like mercury ointments for skin diseases. Their failures taught as much as their wins, laying bricks for modern chemistry. Danger was part of the gig. Labs were fire traps. Crucibles exploded, fumes choked, and mercury gave alchemists tremors or madness. In 1317, one alchemist in Paris blew up his house, earning a ban from the city. The church was another threat. Alchemy's mystical vibes smelled like heresy, and dabbling in God's work could land you in hot water. Pope John XXIII in 1317 banned alchemy, calling it fraud. But plenty of monks kept at it in secret. Kings were no safer alchemists, who promised gold, but delivered duds, faced prison or the gallows. Rivalries were fierce. Alchemists were secretive, hiding recipes in codes or fake steps to mess with competitors. In 14th century England, Thomas Norton and George Ripley traded barbs in treatises, each claiming the other's methods were bunk. Some faked results to scam patrons painting lead to look gold, or finding nuggets in crucibles. These cons gave alchemy a bad rep. But real alchemists, like Nicholas Flamel, kept it legit, earning fame and rumors of immortality. Flamel's house in Paris still stands, etched with alchemical symbols. Patrons fueled the drama. Kings like Edward III or Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II bankrolled labs, dreaming of gold or eternal life. Nobles hired alchemists as status symbols, like owning a Ferrari, but pressure was intense fail, and you'd lose funding or worse. Success wasn't much better. A breakthrough could make rivals jealous or spark theft. Alchemists walked a knife's edge, balancing science, showmanship, and survival in a world that both craved and feared their work. Alchemy wasn't just about gold, it was a cultural force. Its symbols, snakes eating tails, phoenixes rising, popped up in art and poetry. Manuscripts like the Aurora Consurgens blended alchemy with Christian mysticism, painting the stone as Christ. Alchemists influenced medicine, with figures like Paracelsus in the 16th century pushing chemical cures over old-school herbs. Their tools, stills, furnaces became lab staples, and their mindset, questioning nature's rules, paved the way for the scientific revolution. That's it for this chapter. Next time, we'll explore alchemy's legacy, its clash with the church, and how it transformed into modern science. Drop a comment. What's the wildest alchemical experiment you heard? Hit that like button if you're loving this, and subscribe for more. Catch you in the next one. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the channel for the final chapter of our medieval alchemy saga. We've stirred through smoky labs, wild experiments, and the drama that made alchemists legends. Tonight, we're wrapping up with alchemy's lasting legacy, how it shaped science, clashed with the church, and faded into the modern world. If you're new, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love our global crew. Let's get cozy and finish this mystical journey. Alchemy's biggest legacy is its secret identity as the granddaddy of chemistry. Its niche was questioning how stuff works, and that curiosity lit the fuse for science. Alchemists didn't find the philosopher's stone, but they discovered real stuff: acids, alcohols, even early explosives. Their tools, like the alembic, are still used in labs, minus the mystical vibes. Figures like Robert Boyle in the 17th century, often called the first chemist, owed a nod to alchemists who'd been distilling and mixing for centuries. Boyle's air pump, straight out of an alchemist's playbook. Medicine got a boost too. Alchemists like Paracelsus ditched ancient herb lore for chemical cures, using mercury or sulfur to treat syphilis or wounds. It wasn't perfect. Mercury wasn't exactly a health food, but it pushed doctors to experiment. Paracelsus's motto, "The dose makes the poison," is still a medical truth. Alchemical texts also inspired pharmacology. Distilling plant essences led to tinctures and balms that pharmacies still stock. Even cosmetics, like rose water or lead-based makeup yikes, trace back to alchemical recipes. Art and culture drank deep from alchemy's well. Its symbols, dragons, moons, hermaphrodites filled medieval art. From cathedral carvings to manuscripts like the Splendor Solis, poets like Chaucer poked fun at alchemists in the canon's yeoman's tale, while mystics saw alchemy as a soul's journey. Renaissance painters like Bosch used alchemical imagery to show human folly or divine truth. Even Shakespeare's The Tempest has Prospero, a wizardly alchemist, brewing storms. Alchemy's mix of mystery and hope made it a cultural gold mine. The church, though, was a thorn in alchemy's side. Early on, monks like Albertus Magnus dabbled, seeing alchemy as God's work revealed. But by the 14th century, the church got antsy. Transmutation smelled like hubris, and coded texts looked like witchcraft. In 1317, Pope John XXIII banned alchemy, though he reportedly had his own lab classic medieval hypocrisy. Alchemists dodged trouble by framing their work as spiritual, not demonic. But some weren't lucky. In 1404, England banned alchemy without royal permission, fearing fraud. Still, secret labs hummed in monasteries and castles. Too tempting to quit. By the 16th century, alchemy was at a crossroads. The Renaissance brought new ideas, and science started splitting from mysticism. Figures like Francis Bacon pushed experiments over dogma, but they still read alchemical texts. The scientific revolution, with Galileo and Newton, tipped the scales. Newton, a closet alchemist, spent more time chasing the stone than gravity, but his math outshone his potions. By the 18th century, chemistry took over, with labs ditching symbols for formulas. Alchemy became a relic, mocked as fool's gold by Enlightenment thinkers, but alchemy didn't vanish. It transformed. Its quest for truth lives in science's DNA. From labs to particle colliders, psychology grabbed its ideas too. Carl Jung saw alchemy as a map of the mind, with transmutation mirroring self-discovery. Even pop culture loves it. Harry Potter's Philosopher's Stone, Full Metal Alchemist, you name it. Modern alchemists chase fusion, or AI, echoing that medieval hunger for the impossible. The dream of turning lead into gold. It's now about turning ideas into breakthroughs. Alchemy was messy, magical, and human. It failed at gold, but struck wisdom, teaching us to question, experiment, and dream. Its smoky labs birthed science, art, and a spark that still burns. Alchemists weren't wizards. They were pioneers, mixing faith and fire to light the way. That's the end of our alchemy saga. Thanks for brewing this with me. Drop a comment. What's the coolest alchemical legacy? Hit that like button if you loved this. And subscribe for more historical dives. We've covered a lot. So let me know what story you want next. Catch you in the next one.